On the morning of our 40th anniversary, I woke up to find my husband, and our entire life savings gone. He ran off with a younger woman, thinking I'd stay silent. But I had something he didn't expect: evidence, anger, and nothing left to lose. My name is Elaine. I'm 67 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. If you had asked me a few years ago what I thought my life would look like at this age, I would have told you I'd be spending my golden years sitting on the back porch of our home, watching the sunset with my husband of 40 years. We'd talk about our children, maybe grandkids, share memories, and hold hands like we always used to. I truly believed in forever. I believed in him. We met when I was just 27. He was charming, ambitious, with a quiet confidence that made me feel safe. I was working as a librarian at the time, and he was already knee-deep in business dealings. I didn't know much about his work, and he never explained much either. "Too boring for you," he'd say, smiling. I didn't mind. I trusted him. That trust lasted for 4 decades. The early years of our marriage were simple. We didn't have much, but we built a life brick by brick. I worked while he chased his business goals. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. We didn't have children, and though that hurt for a while, we grew past it. Our life was still full of laughter, vacations, and quiet nights at home. I never imagined I could feel alone in a relationship that seemed so full. It was our 40th wedding anniversary when everything changed. I still remember that morning. I woke up early, excited to surprise him with breakfast in bed. I made his favorite, blueberry pancakes and strong coffee. But his side of the bed was cold. The closet door was slightly open, and I noticed some of his clothes were missing. His phone was gone too. At first, I thought he'd gone out to pick up flowers, or maybe something special for our anniversary. But hours passed, and there was no word from him. I called. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. I started feeling a tightness in my chest, an uneasiness I couldn't explain. I tried to stay calm, but by evening, panic had taken over. It wasn't just that he was gone. It was the silence, the stillness of the house, and the strange feeling that something was deeply, terribly wrong. The next morning, I drove to the bank. I had a strange feeling I couldn't shake. My heart was pounding as I walked up to the counter and asked to check the balance of our joint retirement account. The woman behind the counter hesitated. She tapped her keyboard for a while before she looked up and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. The account shows 0 balance." I felt the world blur for a moment. My voice trembled. "What do you mean 0 balance?" "It was emptied 3 days ago," she said, handing me a printout. All funds were transferred to a private account. I stood there in shock, holding that piece of paper, my hands shaking. I checked my personal account too. Everything was gone. Everything. Not a cent left. I couldn't even afford the coffee I'd bought that morning. I sat in my car for what felt like hours. I didn't cry right away. I couldn't. I just sat there, stunned, trying to understand what had just happened to my life. 40 years. All our savings. Gone. And him? Vanished. Eventually I drove home, or what was left of home. But it wasn't long before I realized I didn't even have that. The house wasn't in my name. It had been refinanced multiple times, and the latest documents, signed without me knowing, had transferred full ownership to him. The home I thought we owned was foreclosed just 2 weeks later. I was left with a small trailer he'd bought years ago. I used to tease him about it, calling it his man cave. Now it was my only shelter. I moved into it with nothing but a suitcase and a handful of old photo albums. No money. No answers. No husband. I tried calling him for weeks. At first, the phone would ring and go to voicemail. Then it was disconnected. Friends we knew together either claimed they didn't know where he was, or didn't want to get involved. I found out from a distant cousin of his that he had been seen in another state with a much younger woman. That hit me hard, not just because he left me, but because he replaced me like I meant nothing. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept thinking back to the little things, how distant he had become in the last year, how he always brushed off my questions about money, how he changed his passwords and laughed when I asked why. I thought it was just age or stress. But now I knew. It was betrayal. Plain and cruel. I stayed in that trailer, surrounded by silence and emptiness, for weeks. I kept thinking maybe he'd come back. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe someone had forced him. But deep down I knew the truth. He left. He planned it. And he took everything. One night, as I was going through an old drawer of files we'd brought to the trailer years ago, I found a box full of documents, old tax records, some bank slips, receipts. My first instinct was to throw them away. I didn't want to see anything that reminded me of him. But something told me to look. I pulled out one of the folders and started reading. At first, it made no sense. There were numbers, foreign account names, mentions of shell companies in places I didn't even recognize. The more I read, the more I began to see patterns. Transactions that didn't match our lifestyle. Transfers to accounts not in our names. I didn't fully understand it, but I knew it wasn't right. I spent the next week combing through every single file. I made notes, circled items, and used the trailer's old laptop to search what I could online. It became an obsession, figuring out what he had done, where the money went, and why he had hidden so much from me. I didn't have anyone to talk to. I didn't want pity, and I didn't want anyone to think I was a fool, though that's exactly how I felt. But I kept digging. I started to suspect that this wasn't just a man running off with another woman. This was something much bigger. Then late one evening, while staring at yet another spreadsheet I had copied from one of the files, I saw something. An offshore account linked to a shell company that had his initials buried in its name. It was like a puzzle piece clicking into place. My hands were trembling. I sat back in my chair and whispered, "You didn't just betray me. You broke the law." That was the moment something changed in me. The pain, the shame, it all turned into something else, determination. But I wasn't sure what to do next. I was sitting on a mountain of evidence, alone in a trailer, with no money, and no idea who would believe me. And that, right there, was where everything started to turn. I didn't sleep much after that night. My thoughts were racing, and my heart felt like it was constantly pounding in my chest. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how much I hadn't known about the man I'd shared my life with. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my money or our home. I was mourning the man I thought he was. And now I was sitting on something that could destroy him legally. But fear crept in. What if I was wrong? What if no one believed me? I was just an old woman living in a trailer, with a stack of dusty files and no real understanding of financial laws. I had no experience with offshore accounts or tax fraud. I didn't even know where to start. But I also knew I couldn't ignore what I'd found. The next morning, I pulled myself together. I put on the nicest outfit I had left, just a simple blouse and jeans that still fit, and drove into town. My car, thankfully, was still in my name. I had just enough gas and a little bit of cash left in a cookie jar to buy myself a cup of coffee and park for a few hours. I walked into the public library, of all places, the same kind I used to work in. Funny how life goes full circle. I asked the librarian, a kind young woman named Taylor, if I could use one of the public computers. She smiled and pointed me to a row near the back. I logged on and started searching. How to report financial fraud, offshore accounts and the IRS, hidden assets in divorce, anything that sounded close to what I was dealing with. Hours passed. My back ached. My eyes burned. But I was learning. Slowly, piece by piece, I was beginning to understand the web my husband had spun. It wasn't just one account. He'd created multiple shell companies in foreign countries, places known for loose tax regulations. There were paper trails, hidden in the files I had taken from our trailer. Transfers that were suspicious. Patterns that matched classic tax evasion. At one point, I stumbled upon a government website. It had a tip form, anonymous if needed, where people could report suspected tax fraud. I hovered over it with my mouse, hands shaking. It felt like crossing a line. But I reminded myself, he had already crossed every line there was. I took a deep breath and started typing. I didn't mention my name at first. I just wrote what I knew: dates, amounts, names of the shell companies. I uploaded a few scanned documents from a USB I had brought with me. When I clicked submit, I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt numb. 2 days later, I received a call on the prepaid phone I had picked up at a gas station. A woman's voice introduced herself as an agent from the IRS. She said they had received my report and had questions. I asked if I was in trouble. She said, "No, ma'am. But you may have just blown the whistle on a serious case of fraud." My heart skipped. I wasn't sure what to say. She asked if I'd be willing to speak in person. I agreed. We arranged a meeting in a secure government office in downtown Austin. The building was cold, sterile. I remember clutching my folder of documents like it was a lifeline. When I met the agent, her name was Janet. She looked at me with a mix of kindness and seriousness. She listened as I spoke, carefully, quietly, telling her what I had found, how I had found it, and why I had come forward. At one point, I paused and asked, "Do you think he planned this all along?" Janet looked at me and said gently, "From what you've shown me, ma'am, it's very likely he's been planning this for years." That hit hard. Years. While I had been decorating the house for holidays, celebrating anniversaries, cooking his favorite meals. He'd been building a life behind my back. One I wasn't part of. One he was always planning to run to. Janet took everything I had, photocopies, spreadsheets, even the scribbled notes I'd made in the margins. She told me to sit tight, that it might take time, but the wheels were turning. Days turned into weeks. I tried to keep busy. I volunteered at a local shelter a few days a week, just to keep my mind off things. But every time my phone rang, I jumped. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not yet. I wasn't ready to speak it out loud. It was still too raw. Then one morning, Janet called again. She said they had opened a full investigation. They had traced the offshore accounts. It was worse than even I had suspected. My husband hadn't just stolen from me, he had evaded taxes, hidden income, and funneled money through illegal means. And they had evidence to take him to court. She asked if I'd be willing to testify. I hesitated. My stomach turned. I never imagined myself in a courtroom. I had never even had a speeding ticket. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. It was about standing up for myself, for the woman who had given everything and been left with nothing. Yes, I said. I'll do it. Over the next month, I worked closely with Janet and the legal team. I was briefed, interviewed, and asked to go over every detail. It was hard, reliving it all. Seeing his name on documents, hearing about how much he had taken, not just from me, but from the government, from everyone. I felt sick, but I pushed through. The hardest part was when they showed me a recent photo of him. He looked happy, relaxed, standing on a beach with that younger woman wrapped around his arm. She looked barely 30. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I slid it back across the table and said, "He can smile now. Let's see if he's still smiling in court." I knew the trial wouldn't be easy. But I was ready. I had gone from a broken woman in a trailer to a whistleblower standing face to face with truth. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a strength I didn't know I had. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting back. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't scared. The days leading up to the trial felt like I was walking through fog. Everything was blurry and nothing felt real. I'd sit alone in the trailer and listen to the wind outside, wondering how I'd gone from a woman with a beautiful home, a steady retirement, and a husband of 40 years, to someone preparing to testify in a federal courtroom. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the wall, thinking about the way he used to smile at me while reading the newspaper, or the way he'd brush my hair back behind my ear. It was like those memories belonged to someone else's life now. I kept a notebook with me wherever I went. I jotted down details, dates, moments, emotions. Janet, the IRS agent, told me that writing would help me stay clear when I took the stand. "You've lived through it," she said, "and that makes your words powerful." But there were times when I questioned if I was doing the right thing. He was still my husband, at least legally. 40 years is a long time to unlearn. It's a long time to forget how someone once made you feel safe, even if it was all a lie. The night before the trial, I didn't sleep. I lay on the small couch in the trailer, wrapped in a blanket I had knitted years ago, and stared at the ceiling. My mind played tricks on me, mixing the past and the present. Our anniversary dinners, quiet evenings on the porch, and the moment I found the empty bank account staring back at me from the screen. I whispered to myself, "You're doing this because you have to." I repeated it like a prayer. The morning of the trial, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the wrinkles out of my skirt. I wore a simple outfit, nothing flashy. I wanted to be taken seriously, but more than that, I just wanted to look like myself. A woman who had been through something hard and had come out standing. When I arrived at the courthouse, Janet was already waiting outside. She gave me a nod, her eyes calm but serious. We walked inside together, the air cold and heavy with silence. I kept my eyes on the ground, not wanting to see anyone just yet. Not wanting to see him. But I did. He was there across the room, sitting beside his lawyer. He looked older, thinner. His hair had more gray than I remembered, and he was wearing a suit I had bought for him years ago. The same one he wore to our nephew's wedding. For a moment my breath caught. Not because I missed him, but because I didn't recognize him anymore. He didn't look at me. Not once. The judge entered, and the room quieted. The trial began. There were opening statements, evidence presented by government lawyers and witnesses, financial experts who explained how the shell companies worked, how the accounts were traced, how the fraud was discovered. I listened to them speak about the man I had shared a bed with for most of my adult life, as if he were a stranger. In a way, he was. When it was my turn to testify, I walked slowly to the stand. My knees felt weak, but I held my head high. I raised my hand, took the oath, and sat down. The courtroom was silent. They asked me about our life together, about the day I discovered he was gone, about the bank accounts, the files, the moment I realized what he had done. I spoke clearly, even when my throat tightened. I told them how I had spent nights in that trailer, piecing together documents he never thought I'd find. I spoke about the lies, the betrayal, the stolen years. At one point, they asked me why I had come forward. I paused. Then I said, because someone has to stand up when they've been wronged. Because I didn't want to be a victim anymore. His lawyer tried to shake me. He asked about my mental state, about whether I could be mistaken. He hinted that maybe I was confused or bitter. But I stayed calm. I answered every question with honesty. I told the truth. That's all I had left to give. When I stepped down from the stand, I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I had already seen everything I needed to see in the empty spaces he left behind. The trial lasted several more days. More evidence came out, money wired to unknown names, property purchased in foreign countries, even life insurance policies I didn't know existed. It was like peeling back layers of a person who had carefully built a second life while destroying the one we had shared. Finally, it was over. The jury found him guilty on multiple counts of tax fraud, financial deception, and money laundering. He was sentenced to prison. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just sat there, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. As I walked out of the courthouse, Janet caught up to me. She handed me a small folder. "What's this?" I asked. "It's not much," she said. "But the court approved a portion of the recovered funds to be returned to you. It won't cover everything he took, but it's a start." I opened it. It wasn't a lot, but it was more than I had expected. Enough to get back on my feet. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the hard part, Elaine. You stood up." I stood there on the courthouse steps, staring out at the street. The world moved on like nothing had happened. Cars passed. People walked by. But I had changed. I had spent so many years thinking I needed him to survive. I thought love meant trust without question. I thought silence kept the peace. But I had been wrong. That day, I realized I wasn't just Elaine, the wife who was left behind. I was Elaine, the woman who rose again. But the story didn't end there. Not yet, because the most important chapter of my life was just beginning. After the trial ended and he was sentenced, I didn't know what to feel at first. People expected me to be relieved, maybe even happy, but the truth is I was exhausted. Not just from the court dates or the stress of testifying, but from carrying the weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't just the betrayal that had worn me down. It was the realization that my life as I had known it was gone, and I had to start over from scratch at 67. I went back to the trailer that night and sat in silence for a long time. I stared at the table where I had sorted through all the files that helped take him down. That little kitchen had become a war room in a battle I never expected to fight. And I had won. But when the dust settled, I realized that winning didn't mean I got my old life back. It meant I had to build a new one. A few weeks after the sentencing, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the IRS, confirming that a portion of the recovered funds had been approved for return. The amount wasn't anywhere close to what we had saved together, but it was enough for me to get out of the trailer, to rent a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of Austin, and to breathe a little easier. I remember standing in that empty apartment the first time I walked in with the keys in my hand. There was no furniture yet, no curtains, just a mattress I had brought in and a few boxes of clothes and old books. But it was mine. It was the first thing I had owned in my name in years. I spent my days unpacking, organizing, and learning how to be alone again. Not lonely, just alone. There's a difference. I took walks in the park nearby, cooked simple meals, and went to the library just to sit and read, like I used to before life got complicated. Slowly, I started to feel like a person again, not just a woman who had been left behind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that other women out there might be going through what I did, or worse, and they might not have the evidence I had or the courage to speak up. That thought stayed with me. It kept me up at night. I didn't want anyone else to feel the way I had felt in those early days, confused, ashamed, helpless. One afternoon, I saw a flyer pinned to a corkboard at the library. It was for a local women's group that met weekly to talk about financial literacy, independence, and support after divorce or loss. I didn't think much of it at first. I folded it and stuck it in my purse. But the next Tuesday, I found myself standing outside the community center, heart racing, wondering what I was doing there. I walked in. The room was warm and filled with women of all ages, some younger, some older than me. They were talking, laughing softly, sipping coffee. A woman named Marla welcomed me with a hug. "First time?" she asked kindly. I nodded. They didn't ask for details that first day. They just let me sit, listen, and absorb. And as the weeks went by, I started sharing bits of my story. Not all at once. Just pieces. I talked about the missing money, the trailer, the files. And when I finally said the word fraud, they didn't look shocked. They looked understanding. It was Marla who pulled me aside one evening after the meeting. "Elaine," she said, "you should speak. To more women. What you went through, it could help others." I laughed at first. "I'm not a speaker, Marla." "Yes, you are," she said, smiling. "You've already survived the hardest part. Talking is the easy part now." It took some convincing, but I agreed to try. The next month, I gave a talk to a group of about 20 women in the same community center. I told my story, just like I'm telling it now. Truthfully, simply, without drama. I told them how easy it is to miss the signs when love makes you blind. I told them how I ignored the changes in my husband's behavior because I didn't want to believe something was wrong. I told them how important it is to have your own name on things, your own bank account, your own credit history, your own copy of every financial document. The room was silent when I finished. Then one woman raised her hand and said, "I think my husband is hiding money from me too. What should I do?" That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. I started preparing small handouts, simple checklists and tips, all in plain language. I partnered with a local attorney and a financial advisor who volunteered their time to help teach other women about legal rights and financial safety. We called it Stand Tall, because that's what I wanted every woman to feel after being knocked down. Over time, I met women from all walks of life. Some were younger, just coming out of toxic relationships. Others were older, like me, rebuilding after decades of silence. They cried, they laughed, they hugged. And they healed. I watched it happen slowly, beautifully. And I healed too, right alongside them. I never told my story to get sympathy. I told it because staying silent would have let him win twice. First by taking my life apart, and second by keeping me quiet. I refused to give him that second victory. Sometimes women ask me if I still think about him. The truth is, yes, I do. But not with sadness. Not with anger either. I think about him the way you think about a storm that's passed. You remember it clearly, you remember what it took from you, but you also remember that you survived it. He's in prison now, serving time for what he did. I don't write him. I don't visit. There's nothing left to say. The man I married is gone, and maybe he was never really there to begin with. But I'm still here. And I've found something he never had: peace, purpose, and a community of women who refuse to be broken. This isn't the life I planned, but it's the life I've built with my own two hands. And for the first time in a long time, I can say I'm proud of that. People often ask me if I ever saw him again after the trial. The answer is no. And truthfully, I don't want to. I think about what I'd say if I did, if he walked into a room today and sat across from me. At one point, I imagined screaming at him, asking why he did it, why he wasted 40 years of my life just to run away like a coward. But now, I don't think I'd say a single word. He's not worth the breath. Life moved on, even if slowly. I began settling into the quiet rhythm of my new world. Morning coffee on the apartment balcony, volunteer work during the day, and evening meetings with the women from Stand Tall. I had never imagined myself standing in front of a room full of strangers, sharing the darkest moments of my life. But the strange thing is, the more I told my story, the more it stopped hurting. Like every time I spoke, a little more of the weight fell off my chest. One woman I'll never forget was Carla. She was about my age, maybe a few years younger, and had been married for 35 years. Her husband controlled everything: the bills, the bank accounts, even her email passwords. She came up to me after a meeting with tears in her eyes and said, "Elaine, I think I'm living the beginning of your story." We sat in the corner of the room that night, just the two of us, and talked until everyone else had left. She hadn't found any proof yet, but she felt something was wrong. That feeling, the deep, nagging sense that something isn't right, it's something I know too well. I told her to trust her instincts, to start documenting things quietly, to ask questions even when they're uncomfortable. A few months later, she called me. Her voice was shaking. She had found hidden credit cards, bank transfers to unfamiliar accounts, and emails between her husband and someone named M. It was happening again. Another woman waking up inside a life she didn't recognize. With help, Carla got out. She found a lawyer, filed for divorce, and protected her share before it disappeared. She still comes to our meetings, but now she speaks to others. She tells them that knowledge is power, that the moment you stop pretending everything is fine is the moment you take your life back. Watching her grow, watching all of them grow, it gave me something I didn't know I needed. A purpose. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments I felt hollow. Moments when I'd sit alone at night, and the silence felt heavy. I missed companionship, missed the simple things. Someone to talk to over dinner, someone to laugh with during an old movie. Even if he had betrayed me, the habit of having someone there didn't just disappear. And starting over at this age meant facing the reality that many people around me were settled, rooted in long relationships, families, traditions I no longer had. One evening, I was asked to speak at a financial wellness seminar hosted by a local nonprofit. It was held in a modest church hall packed with people, mostly women, but a few men too. I stood behind the podium, hands slightly trembling, and told my story again. I talked about trust, money, deception, and finally justice. When I finished, a man approached me. He was tall, maybe in his 70s, with kind eyes and a soft voice. He introduced himself as Robert. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he said. "Cancer. She was my world." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "I wanted to tell you," he continued, "that you speak with such strength. You remind me of her. She always believed women should understand money, not just leave it to the men." We ended up talking for almost an hour. About life, grief, starting over. He wasn't trying to flirt or impress me. He was just kind. And I realized how rare that had become in my life. Kindness without expectation. Robert started coming to a few of our group meetings, just as a supporter, someone who cared. And over time we became friends. We'd meet for coffee, talk about books, the news, even politics when we dared. There was no pressure, no rush. Just two people, both a little bruised by life, finding comfort in simple conversation. I didn't expect to let anyone in again. My trust had been shattered so deeply I didn't think it could ever rebuild. But Robert never pushed. He never made me feel less for being cautious. And over time, I found myself looking forward to our talks, our walks through the park, even the way he always brought a little folded napkin with him when we shared pastries at the cafe, said it was a habit his wife had taught him. One afternoon, he surprised me by asking if I wanted to go see a local art exhibit. I laughed and said I hadn't done something like that in years. "Then it's about time," he said with a smile. We walked through the gallery slowly, pausing at paintings and sculptures, making up stories about what they meant. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, like maybe life wasn't over just because it had changed. I told him everything eventually. Not just the version I shared in my speeches, but the private pain, the nights I cried on the floor, the shame I carried, the way it felt to realize you never really knew the person you gave your life to. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. And that was enough. Still, I had boundaries. I kept my finances separate. I kept my name on everything I owned. And I encouraged every woman I met to do the same. Love can be beautiful, but it should never cost you your independence. By then, Stand Tall had grown. What started as a small group in a community center had expanded into monthly workshops, partnerships with legal clinics, and online resources for women across the state. We even launched a podcast, just simple interviews with survivors, lawyers, financial experts. I never thought I'd be speaking into a microphone, but if it meant one less woman ended up blindsided like I was, then it was worth it. Looking back, I still feel sad sometimes. Not for losing him, but for losing the version of life I thought I had. The safety I believed in. But I also feel something I never expected, gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the strength it revealed in me. For the women it led me to. For the voice I found in the middle of silence. This chapter of my life may have started with betrayal, but it's no longer about him. It's about me, and the women who refuse to stay broken. Time has a way of softening things, but it doesn't erase them. Even now, years after the courtroom, after the trailer, after losing everything I thought was mine, I still wake up some mornings with that faint trace of sadness in my chest. Not because I miss him, but because I sometimes miss the version of myself who didn't know heartbreak like this. The version who still believed some things were unbreakable. But then I remember how far I've come. And I remind myself that I didn't just survive, I rebuilt. Stand Tall continued to grow beyond anything I imagined. What started as a local support group turned into something that women across Texas began to hear about. Word spread, first through community boards and libraries, and then online. Women from Houston, San Antonio, Even small rural towns I'd never visited before reached out to us. Some were newly separated, others had been divorced for years, and only recently discovered the financial abuse they had lived through. I heard stories that were all different on the surface, but underneath, they shared the same quiet suffering, the same misplaced trust, the same fear of starting over too late. One woman I remember well was May. She had been married for 22 years, stayed home raising 3 children while her husband built a business she thought was theirs. One day, she found out her name wasn't even listed on the house deed. He had used her signature without consent, forged documents, and hidden income. By the time she realized it, the business was in debt, and she was left with nothing. May was broken when I met her, soft-spoken, anxious, afraid to ask questions, as if every word might cause her more trouble. But after sitting with our group for a few weeks, something changed. She began taking notes. She asked to meet with our volunteer attorney. Eventually, she filed a claim, and she won. She told me one day, with tears in her eyes, "Elaine, I thought I was too late to have a life of my own. But you showed me I'm not." I don't know if I ever really understood what courage meant before all of this. Courage isn't loud. It's not marching or shouting or demanding justice with fists raised, though sometimes it can be. For most of us, courage is quieter. It's opening the drawer when you're afraid of what's inside. It's asking questions even when the answers hurt. It's standing up in a courtroom and telling the truth, even when the person you're speaking against once held your hand every night. There were moments I questioned whether I had done the right thing by going public with my story. My name appeared in a few articles after the trial, and once, a local news station asked to interview me for a segment on elder financial abuse. I agreed nervously. I remember sitting in the studio, lights glaring, the host asking, "Elaine, how did you find the strength to fight back?" I paused, unsure what to say. Then I told her the truth. Because no one else was going to do it for me. The response was overwhelming. Women wrote letters, emails, even handwritten notes sent to the community center. One woman wrote, "I watched you on TV while sitting next to the man who drained my account without my knowledge. That night, I packed a bag and left. That letter sits in my desk drawer even now, worn at the edges, but still powerful. Even though I was helping others, I was still learning to help myself. Letting people in was the hardest part. Robert, kind, patient Robert, never pushed, but he was always there. On days when I felt strong, we'd go out for lunch or visit a local farmer's market. On days when I felt small and tired, he'd come over with soup and sit quietly next to me while I watched old movies. I told him once, "I don't know if I believe in love anymore." He looked at me gently and said, "That's okay. I believe in enough for both of us." One day, he brought over a small plant in a clay pot. A peace lily. "It doesn't need much," he said. "Just some light and water. It'll tell you when it needs care." I placed it on the kitchen windowsill. Every time it drooped, I gave it what it needed, and it stood tall again. I started seeing myself in that plant, bent at times but never beyond saving. But not everything was peaceful. One morning, I received a letter I didn't expect. It was from him, my ex-husband, sent from prison. I stood at my mailbox for a long while, holding the envelope, my name written in his handwriting. My hands trembled. I thought about throwing it away. But curiosity won. I went inside and sat down at the table where I'd once discovered his lies, and I opened it. The letter wasn't long. He didn't apologize. Not really. He said he was sorry for how things ended, but never took responsibility for what he did. He wrote that he missed the life we had, and that prison had given him time to reflect. He asked if I would ever consider visiting him, just once. I folded the letter slowly and slid it into a drawer. I didn't respond. That chapter was closed. I told the group about the letter the following week. They asked if it shook me. I said, "No. If anything, it reminded me of how far I've come." We talked about closure that day. Not the kind you get from apologies or explanations, but the kind you give yourself. The kind that says, "I don't need anything more to move forward." I look at my life now, and it's not perfect. I still have bills to pay. I still have moments where the past creeps in like a shadow. But I also have joy. I have friendship. I have women who call me when they're scared, who tell me I help them find their voice. I have my peace lily, still blooming on the windowsill. Sometimes I sit at my desk in the evening and write in my journal, just thoughts, memories, moments I want to hold on to. One entry I read recently said, "I thought the storm would end me, but it cleared the sky." And that's exactly what it did. It cleared the sky. But there's still one more piece to this story. One more step that changed everything. for me and for the women who still walk through the doors of Stand Tall, looking for answers. Because what happened next proved that even after everything was said and done, justice still had more work to do. It was about a year after the trial when something unexpected happened. Something that reminded me that even after justice is served in a courtroom, real justice sometimes keeps unfolding in ways you never saw coming. I had been invited to speak at a financial awareness conference for women in Austin. It was a big event, much larger than anything I'd done before. The room was filled with attorneys, nonprofit leaders, social workers, even city officials. I stood on that stage, under bright lights, and told my story the same way I always did, honest, plain from the heart. I spoke about how I had once believed that love meant trust without limits, and how I'd learned, too late, that blind trust can be dangerous. I spoke about financial abuse, how invisible it is, how it hides in smiles and anniversaries and quiet bank withdrawals. After my talk, a woman from the IRS approached me. Her name was Angela. She introduced herself, shook my hand, and said, "Elaine, there's more to your husband's case than what came out in court. We've been working quietly on another investigation." I stared at her, unsure of what she meant. She explained that during the original trial, only a portion of his hidden assets had been uncovered, just enough to build the case and convict him. But after sentencing, more offshore accounts had been linked to his name. Shell corporations that hadn't shown up in the first audit. Some were connected to properties in South America and Europe. He'd buried money deep, layers upon layers of deception, and not just under my name. There were others. Angela told me that the IRS had opened a new case, one that involved multiple victims. Apparently, I wasn't the only woman he had financially deceived. Over the years, he had been involved with other women, some of whom didn't even know he was married. He had used fake business partnerships, fake investments, even fake names in some instances to gain their trust and take their money. My stomach turned as I listened. It was like learning the man I had married didn't just betray me. He had made a lifestyle out of it. Angela asked if I'd be willing to help. Not just with documents, but by speaking to some of the women. At first, I wasn't sure. I thought, maybe it was better to keep moving forward and leave the past in the past. But then I thought about the women I hadn't met yet. The ones who might be sitting in silence like I once did, wondering where their money went, blaming themselves for not seeing it sooner. I agreed. Over the next several months, I worked with investigators and lawyers again, but this time as an advocate, not a victim. I met 3 other women who had been manipulated by him. One of them, Maria, had invested nearly $50,000 into a tech startup he claimed he was building. Another, Diane, had opened a joint account with him, only to find it emptied a week before her mother's funeral. He had even used fake business names that looked nearly identical to real companies to appear legitimate. Each time I heard one of their stories, I felt both fury and validation. He hadn't just fooled me, he had fooled many. And each time he used the same tricks. He was charming, calculated, and patient. He waited until trust was deep enough to start draining lives dry. It made me sick, but it also made me fight harder. I helped build a report, collecting every detail from the women, helping them organize documents, encouraging them when their voices trembled. I knew what that fear felt like, the shame, the second-guessing. But I also knew the power that came from finally telling the truth out loud. Eventually, the IRS reopened the case publicly. This time, it wasn't just about tax fraud. It was about exploitation, deception, and a pattern of abuse that spanned over a decade. And once again, I was called to testify. Not for myself this time, but for the other women. I stood in court, older now, stronger, and said, "This man doesn't just steal money. He steals trust. He steals peace. He builds a false world around you, and then walks away like it never mattered. But we matter. Every woman he hurt deserves to be heard." The second trial ended with new charges and additional sentencing. He wouldn't be walking free for a very long time. And as I watched him being led away, I felt something different from what I'd felt the first time. Not peace. Not relief. Just finality. The book had closed. Not just my chapter, but his. After that, something shifted in me. I realized that my story wasn't just about loss or betrayal or even justice. It was about purpose. I had turned my deepest wound into something that lit the way for others. Women continued to come to our group, to our events, and now to our online community. We expanded beyond Austin. Volunteers helped us reach out to women in shelters, prisons, halfway houses. Women who thought they were too old, too late, too ruined to start over. We showed them otherwise. One day, I received a card in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a note. Thank you for not staying silent. You saved me. No name. No details. Just that one sentence. I cried reading it. Not because I needed to be thanked, but because it reminded me why I told the story in the first place. Silence is where people like him thrive. Secrets are their weapon. But truth, it breaks their grip. Robert's still in my life. We go slow. We enjoy each other's company. He never asks more than I can give, and maybe that's what makes it work. Sometimes we drive to the lake and sit in folding chairs with sandwiches and a thermos of tea. We don't talk about the past unless I want to. He once said, "You don't need to be anyone's wife to be whole." And he's right. I'm not the same woman who woke up on her 40th anniversary with a heart full of love and a home about to disappear. I'm not the same woman who sat in a trailer with empty bank accounts and shaking hands. I'm Elaine, the woman who fought back. The woman who helped others stand tall. The woman who turned betrayal into something powerful and lasting. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this: you're never too old to start over. Never too late to speak up. And never too broken to build again. So if you're listening to this, if you're sitting in your own silence, wondering how everything went so wrong, hear me now. You are not alone. You are not stupid. You are not too late. You can stand tall. Just like I did. Just like we all can.